Buddha once said that the cause of suffering is clinging, and the end of clinging is the end of suffering. Tonight, we will sit with this discovery, exploring it through a collection of gentle stories and teachings. Each one offers a small taste of freedom. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. As we journey together, there is no figuring out to be done. There is no goal at the end of the path. Peace is not something to accomplish, but something we discover slowly when the mind grows still enough to see what was always here. So settle in, relax, and take a slow, deep breath. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. The Buddha was once asked what causes our suffering. His answer was simple. He said, "It is not the world that hurts us. It is the way we hold on to it." He had a word for this: clinging. Clinging is something we all do, mostly without noticing. It is the small reaching of the mind toward what feels pleasant, and the quiet pushing away of what feels difficult. It is the wish for a good moment to last, and the hope that a hard one will end soon. It shows up in everyday ways. We meet a friend, and the evening passes too quickly, and already we are gripping it, trying to keep it from ending. We feel a moment of calm and immediately begin to wonder how to hold on to it. We have a thought we like and turn it over and over, not wanting it to pass. These are not failures. They are simply what the mind does. But the Buddha noticed something curious. A friend held too tightly grows distant. A moment held too tightly slips into worry about its ending. A wish held too tightly becomes a fist around our own happiness. The harder we squeeze, the more slips through our fingers. The grip itself is what creates the suffering. There is a Zen story about a young man who could not stop thinking. He had walked for 2 days through the green hill country of an old kingdom to reach the small hut of a monk who was said to be wise. The young man's mind was full. A wrong had been done to him many seasons past. Though he had tried again and again to set it down, the memory returned to him every morning, sharp and fresh, as if it had happened only the night before. He came to the monk's hut at evening. The hut was small and low, with a thatched roof gone soft from many seasons of rain. A wisp of cooking smoke rose from a small fire pit beside the doorway. The smell of warm rice drifted on the evening air. The monk was sitting on a low wooden step, mending a sandal in the soft light. "Teacher," the young man said, "I have walked a long way. I cannot find peace. I think about the same thing over and over. I want to put it down, but I cannot." The monk looked up. "Sit," he said. "Tell me." The young man sat on the ground and told his story. The monk listened. He did not interrupt. When the young man had finished, the monk set down his sandal and looked at him for a long moment. "I will not give you any advice tonight," the monk said, "but I will tell you a small story. It is one I learned when I was younger than you are now." The young man waited. "There is a way the hunters in the far southern forests catch monkeys," the monk began. "I learned it from a traveler who had seen it done. It is a clever way and a sad one, and it has stayed with me all my life. The hunters take a coconut. They cut a small hole in the side, just large enough for a monkey's open hand to slip through. Inside the coconut they place a piece of sweet fruit or a handful of rice. Then they tie the coconut to the base of a tree so that it cannot be carried away. And then they wait. In time, a monkey comes down from the branches. She has been watching. She smells the fruit. She approaches the coconut. She slips her hand inside through the small hole, and she takes hold of the fruit. And here's the trouble. With the fruit held in her closed fist, her hand will not come back out of the hole. The hole is too small for a fist. It was only large enough for an open hand. The monkey could free herself in a single moment if she would only let go of the fruit. But she does not let go. The monk paused. Now think about this. The coconut did not catch the monkey. The monkey caught herself. The grip caught her. The trap was the holding. He looked at the young man with great kindness. "Tell me," he said, "what is it that you have been holding so tightly for so long that you cannot pull your hand free of the trap?" The young man did not answer at once. He sat very still in the soft evening. A bird called from somewhere on the hillside. The monk waited. After a long time, the young man said quietly, "Only the thing I have already told you." The monk nodded. "And could you set it down?" he asked. "Not forever, just for one breath. Could you, for one breath, simply open your hand?" The young man closed his eyes. He sat in the quiet for a long while. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the monk. He did not say anything. He did not need to. His shoulders had softened. His jaw had unclenched. Something behind his eyes had loosened. "You see," the monk said softly, "the trap was never the wrong that was done to you. The trap was the holding, and the holding was always yours to release." The young man sat with what the monk had said. The light had faded from the hillside. The first stars had come out. He could feel something he had not felt in many seasons. He could feel his hand simply as a hand, without anything held in it. The young man stayed with the monk for some days. They did not speak much. The monk mended sandals. The young man helped fetch water from the spring. In the mornings he sat outside the hut and watched the light come up over the hills. When at last he walked home, his hand felt strangely light. He could not remember the last time he had not been carrying something in it. This is a simple story, but Zen masters and Buddhist teachers would say it contains the whole of the teaching. We are not so different from the monkey in the coconut. We see something we want, a small joy, a person we love, a moment of peace, a feeling of being safe. We reach for it, and then we grip. We close our fingers around it. We try to make it ours. And just like the monkey's fist around the fruit, the grip itself becomes our trap. The Buddha taught this with the word upadana. It is an old word from the early teachings. It means clinging, or grasping, or holding. It carries the sense of feeding on something, of leaning the whole weight of our happiness against it, of growing so wrapped up in it that we no longer know where we end and the thing begins. When the early Buddhist teachers chose this word, they were trying to point at something that has no neat name in any language. Not desire alone, not love, not need, but that particular quality of grasping that turns a simple wanting into a kind of quiet suffering. We have all felt this without having a name for it. The tightness in the chest when we are afraid of losing something we love. The strange unease that visits us in a happy moment when we begin to wonder how long the happiness will last. the thin shadow that falls across a beautiful day when we start to count its remaining hours. The Buddha pointed to this as the root of much of our pain. Not the loving of things, not the enjoying of things, the clinging to them. There is a difference between the two, and Buddhist teachers spent many years helping their students feel it. To love a person well does not require holding them tightly. In fact, the tighter we hold, the harder it becomes to love them well. We grow anxious about losing them. We try to control them. We begin to relate to our fear instead of to the person in front of us. A moment does not need to be gripped either. The grip turns the joy into a worry about when it will end. We stop being in the moment and start clinging to its passing edges. And the wishes we carry in our hearts can be the same. Squeezed too tightly, they become a kind of suffering. We grow so afraid of not having what we want that we cannot enjoy what we already have. In all of these places, the same simple truth holds. The grip itself is the source of the pain. This is why the Zen masters said that letting go is not loss. It is the opposite of loss. It is the moment we stop creating loss in our own hands. When the monkey opens her hand, the fruit stays in the coconut. The world continues. She walks free into the forest. Nothing real has been lost. Only the trap is gone. There is another small story that Buddhist monks like to tell. Let us explore a story about a man who went to the great market of an ancient trading town. He went with 2 strong arms and a heart full of wanting. Every stall he passed offered something he had to have. A bolt of fine silk, a bronze oil lamp, a bowl of red fruit shining in the sun, a small carved bird made of dark wood. He reached for everything. By the middle of the afternoon, his arms were full. He could barely see over the things he was carrying. He kept dropping the silk. The bronze lamp swung awkwardly against his hip. The bowl of fruit was warm and beginning to bruise. By evening, when he came home, he was exhausted. His arms ached. His head was full of all the things he had wanted to buy but could not carry. He lay down on his mat. He could not rest. He kept thinking about a small jade carving he had passed at the last stall. He had wanted it terribly. He had not been able to fit it in his arms. The next morning he went back to the market. This time he carried nothing. He walked slowly. He looked at the silks, but did not reach for them. He admired the bronze lamps. He smelled the spices from the merchants' baskets. He listened to the calling voices in the soft morning light. By midday he had seen twice as much as he had seen the day before. He did not own any of it, but he had been with all of it. He had noticed the way the silk shimmered when a child ran past and stirred the air. He had heard a small song from a flute seller's stall that he would not have heard the day before because he had been too busy reaching for things. He had watched an old woman bargain over a basket of figs with such delight that he had stopped just to watch her face. He had paused beside a potter's stall and watched a young apprentice learning the wheel, the clay rising slowly under her hands. When he walked home that evening, his arms were empty and his heart was quiet. He had begun to understand what the monk in the hill country had shown the young man. The world does not need to be carried. It can simply be met. Both stories share something simple. No one took anything from the young man in the hut. No one took anything from the man at the market. Neither was told to give anything up. The teaching never asks for renunciation. It only invites a softer hand. This is why, in the Zen tradition, The freedom of letting go is sometimes called a quiet freedom. It does not arrive with great drama. It is not the result of a single mighty decision. It comes, instead, through small moments of noticing. A hand that begins to ache from gripping. A breath that has been held too long. A wish that has begun to feel like a weight rather than a hope. In each of these moments, there is a soft invitation to turn the palm upward, to open the fist, to be with what we love but not to squeeze it. There is an image the Zen masters were fond of. The open hand can hold more than the closed fist. The closed fist holds only itself. The open hand holds the whole of the sky. This is the gentler face of the teaching. Nothing in it asks us to harden or to turn away from what is dear. The invitation is only this, to notice when the hand has begun to clench and to remember that the fingers can ease. The Buddha said that the cause of suffering is clinging. He could just as truly have said that the beginning of peace is the open palm. Let us rest here for a moment. There is no need to do anything with what has been said. The mind can simply settle, the way still water settles after a small stone has fallen through it. When you are ready, we will continue together. Most of us live with a quiet belief that peace is somewhere else. It is in the next year, when the work has finally settled. It is in the next house, when we have finally made it our own. It is in some later phase of life, when the children are older, or when we are. It is just over the horizon, a little further along the road than where we stand now. This is one of the oldest patterns of the human heart. It is so ordinary that we rarely notice it. We live for years inside the quiet conviction that the life we want is in some other place, some other moment, some other version of ourselves. It can happen in the smallest moments. We sit down for a meal we have looked forward to all day, and after the first few bites our mind has already wandered to what comes after. We finally take the rest we have been longing for, and find ourselves restless within the hour. We arrive at the place we worked so long to reach and discover that the feeling of arrival is somehow not quite what we imagined it would be. The Buddha pointed at this gently. He saw how often a person can move through one beautiful day after another, busy in the mind with some other day. He saw how often a person can sit in a room that contains everything they have ever asked for and feel almost nothing, because the attention is somewhere far ahead. The teaching he offered was not a scolding. It was a quiet question. If peace is somewhere else, then how would we know it when we arrived? This question has a story attached to it. It is one of the most beautiful and least hurried stories in the Buddhist tradition, and it has been told in many forms across the centuries. Here is one of them. There is a story in the Buddhist tradition about a young man who set out to find the end of the world. He had heard, when he was very young, that perfect peace lay at the edge of the world. He did not know how he had heard this. It seemed to be a thing everyone knew. The teachers in his village said it in 1,000 small ways. The merchants who passed through hinted at it. Even the old songs sung at the harvest seemed to point towards some distant place where life would finally grow still. So one bright morning, when he was a young man, he gathered a cloth bundle and a wooden staff, and he set out. He traveled north first. He crossed a wide plain where the grass came up to his knees and the wind sang through it in the afternoons. He met farmers who fed him and gave him cool water from their wells. None of them lived at the edge of the world. They pointed him further on. He traveled for many seasons. He crossed pale deserts where the wind moved against the stones at night. He learned to drink small amounts of water carefully and to sleep beneath the stars. He passed through mountain valleys where the air grew thin and his breath came hard. He spent a winter with shepherds in a high pass, learning their language and the names of their goats. Always, when he asked, the people he met pointed further on. He learned the names of cities he would never see again. He sailed across cold green seas in the company of fishermen who taught him their songs. He stood on the lip of a great cliff and watched birds wheeling in the wind below him, and he thought for a moment he had arrived. But the cliff was only another shore. There was always more. Seasons became years, and years became more years. His face grew lined. His hair began to grey. His staff, which had been smooth and pale when he set out, grew dark with the oil of his hand. He had crossed places no one in his village had ever heard of. He had eaten foods he could not have imagined as a boy. He had loved people, briefly, in the way travelers sometimes love, and had moved on. He never reached the edge. One evening, when he was no longer young, he sat down on a low stone wall in a small country he did not know. He looked at his hands. They were thin and worn. He looked at the path stretching ahead. It looked very much like the path stretching behind. He had been walking for so long that walking had become his life. He had almost forgotten why he had set out. Somewhere along the road, the searching itself had become the thing he was, and the thing he was searching for had grown faint and far away. For the first time in many years, he turned around. It took a long time to return. The villages along the way had changed. Some had grown larger. Some had emptied. The wells he remembered from his youth had new stones around them. The faces he had known were gone. When at last he came to his own village, he found that the house he had grown up in stood empty. Children he did not know played in the lane where he had once played. He sat down beside the village well in the late afternoon. He felt very tired. An old woman was drawing water nearby. She had a quiet face, deeply lined, but not unkind. She looked at him for a long moment, as an elder looks at someone who has come from far away. "You have been a long time gone," she said. "Yes," he answered. "Many years." "And what did you find?" He looked at the dust at his feet. He felt his whole long journey rise up in him. "Nothing," he said softly. "I went to find the end of the world. I did not find it. I am old now, and I have nothing to show." The old woman set down her water jar. She came and sat beside him on the wall. "Tell me," she said, "all those years, all those mornings, where did each morning begin?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Each morning, when you opened your eyes, there was sky above you, or a roof, or the canvas of a tent. There was the cold of stone, or the warmth of a blanket. There was breath in your chest. There were sounds and light, and the slow rising of the world around you." She paused. Where did all of that arise? He did not understand at first. He looked at her for a long moment. "In me," he said slowly. "It arose in me. In my eyes. In my hearing. In my mind." She nodded. "And so the world you were trying to reach the edge of," she said gently. "Where was it, exactly?" He sat very still. The shadows lengthened across the dusty lane. A small bird landed at the rim of the well and dipped its beak to drink. He began to weep, not in sorrow, something else, something he could not name. The whole time, he said. The old woman did not speak. She let the silence rest between them, kind and unhurried. The whole time, he said again, I was carrying it with me. Every morning, the world I was looking for, the peace I was looking for, it was rising in me each day. I just kept moving away from it. The old woman smiled, very gently. Now you have come home, she said. Now you can sit down. He stayed in his village. He did not travel again. He drew water from the well in the mornings. He sat in the shade of a fig tree in the afternoons. He spoke with the children when they wandered near. He grew old in peace, and the quiet he had crossed the world to find arose every morning as it had always arisen. Softly, in him, he simply had not known to look. This story has been told in many forms across the Buddhist tradition. The names change. The setting changes. The seeker is sometimes a king, sometimes a fisherman, sometimes a child grown weary. But the heart of the story is always the same. The Buddha himself once spoke directly to this. He was visited one evening by a being who could move with great speed across the sky. The being told the Buddha that in an earlier life he had spent 100 years trying to reach the end of the world. He had taken vast strides. He had never stopped to eat or rest. And he had still not arrived before his life had run out. The Buddha listened kindly. Then he said something that has been remembered for 2,500 years. He said the end of the world cannot be reached by traveling. But here, he said, in this body, with its perceptions and its mind, here is where the world arises. And here is where it can come to rest. This is a teaching with many layers. The simplest layer is this. The peace we are looking for is not in some other place. It is not in some other time. It is not waiting for us at the end of the road. It is rising in us, quietly, every morning. It comes with the light through the window, with the breath in the chest, with the small everyday sounds of life beginning again at dawn. We do not have to deserve it. We do not have to find it. We only have to stop moving away from it. This is harder than it sounds. The habit of looking elsewhere is one of the oldest habits we have. We have been trained, from very young, to believe that the good thing is just ahead. The promotion, the relationship, the achievement, the next phase. The promise of arrival has been whispered to us so often, by so many voices, that we no longer notice it shaping our days. And so we live, often, in a kind of slow leaning forward. Always reaching, always almost there. The body is in this moment, but the mind is in some imagined later one. The Buddhist teachers said this leaning is itself the obstacle. The leaning is what keeps us from arriving. It is a strange thing to consider. The very act of seeking peace can be the thing that places peace just out of reach. The very effort of getting somewhere is what makes the somewhere we are now feel insufficient. If we could put down the leaning, even for a single breath, we would find that what we have been searching for has been quietly here all along. When the leaning eases, we are home. There is a smaller story that captures the same truth in a single image. A young fish was once swimming in the great wide ocean. She had heard that water was the most precious thing in the world, and that without it, no creature could live. She decided she must find some. She swam east for 100 miles. She did not find water. She swam west for 100 miles. She did not find water. She swam down into the deep, where the light grows thin. She did not find water. She swam up to the bright surface, where the waves caught the sun. She did not find water. At last, weary and ready to give up, she met an old turtle, drifting slowly through the current. "Old one," she said, "I have been looking everywhere for water. I cannot find it anywhere. Have I been swimming the wrong way?" The old turtle blinked at her, slowly. "Little fish," he said, "what do you think is touching you on every side right now?" The fish was very still for a long moment. Then she swam on, but she swam differently. She no longer hurried. She no longer searched. She was already, and always had been, in what she was looking for. There is something the Zen masters used to say in 100 different forms. The mountain you are looking for is the mountain you are standing on. Most of our searching is like this. We comb the wide world for what is already underneath us, around us, breathing us in and out. This does not mean there is nothing to learn. It does not mean there are no journeys worth taking. The young man in the story did learn something on his long road. He learned that the world is wide. He learned the kindness of strangers. He learned what it felt like to lay his head down in many different places. None of that was wasted. What he discovered, in the end, was simply that the thing he had been looking for had been with him the entire time. The looking itself had been the only thing keeping him from seeing. The Buddha taught that this is true of peace. It is true of presence. It is true, in the end, of every quiet good thing we have ever ached for. It is not somewhere else. It is here, arising softly with each breath, with each opening of the eyes, with each ordinary moment that we usually move past without noticing. The freedom is not in arriving at a different place. The freedom is in stopping just for a breath and noticing where we already are. The Buddha once said that the path is not made by walking. The path is made by sitting down and seeing that the ground beneath us was always the ground we were looking for. The journey we thought we had to take turns out, in the end, to be a journey of recognition, a coming back to what was never gone. Let us pause here for a moment. There is nothing to seek. There is nothing to reach for. The quiet that the long-traveled man finally found by his own village well is the same quiet that is already here. When you are ready, we will continue together. Imagine for a moment that you are sitting in a quiet room. You hear a sound from outside, a soft tapping at the window. For a second, before the mind tells you what it is, the sound is just a sound. It has no character. It is neither friendly nor frightening. It is simply a small movement of air against glass. Then the mind catches up. Oh, you think. The wind has knocked a branch against the pane. Or, oh, it might be a small bird. Or, oh, perhaps someone is trying the door. In an instant, the same neutral sound becomes a different experience. With the first thought, it is peaceful. With the second, charming. With the third, it might bring the heart to the throat. The sound did not change. Only the meaning the mind gave it changed. This is a tiny example of something very large. The world we live in is not quite what we think it is. Most of what we call experience is constructed, quietly, by the meeting of the senses and the mind. The Buddha taught this in many places. He saw how perception adds something to every neutral signal. He saw that meaning is laid quietly on top of what is simply there. He used a word from the old language called sankara. The word means many things, but in this setting it means something close to formed, built, put together. He said that our experience of the world is sankara. It is formed by the mind. It is not a flat reflection of what is out there. It is a quiet creation made fresh in every instant. When we begin to see this, something curious happens. The things we hold most tightly begin to feel less solid. The grip eases on its own. There was once a young apprentice in the workshop of an old metalworker in an ancient city. He spent his days bent over small fires, learning the slow skill of shaping bronze. His hands grew sure. His eyes grew careful. One afternoon, returning home through the long market lane, he passed a merchant's stall he had passed 100 times before. But this time, something caught his eye. A bronze lamp. It stood in the middle of the merchant's other wares, but somehow it seemed to glow more than the rest. The shape was simple, but the curve of the body was perfect. The handle had been worked by a master, with a tiny pattern of leaves running along its length. A small flame burned in clean oil, golden and steady. The young apprentice stood very still. He felt as if the lamp was looking back at him. He asked the price. The merchant named a sum that made the young man's stomach tighten. It was more than he could earn in many seasons. "I will save," he said. "I will come back." The merchant smiled, as merchants smile. "Many young men say this," he said. "If the lamp is here when you return, it is yours." The young apprentice went home. That night he did not sleep well. He thought about the lamp. He thought about the curve of its body, the small leaves on the handle, the calm gold of the flame. The next morning he began to save. He saved for many seasons. He went without small comforts. He took on extra work, helping older craftsmen carry their wares to the riverboats in the early mornings. He counted his coins in the evenings before he slept. Each time he counted, he pictured the lamp. The bronze lamp lived in his mind during all this time. He had imagined it so often, in so many lights and shadows, that it had become a kind of friend. He had decided where in his small room he would set it. He had pictured how it would warm the dark winter evenings. He had thought of the soft golden light it would cast on the wooden floor, the wall, the corner where he sat to eat his evening rice. He had begun to think of the lamp as the thing that would change his life. When he finally owned it, his small room would no longer feel small. His tired evenings would no longer feel tired. Something about him would be different, finally, when the lamp sat on his table. At last, when the moon was full one autumn night, he had saved enough. He walked to the merchant's stall the next morning with a sense of quiet ceremony. He was almost frightened. He had been carrying the lamp in his mind for so long that he could hardly believe he was about to carry it in his hands. The lamp was still there. The merchant remembered him. The exchange was made. The young apprentice walked home carrying the lamp very carefully. He set it down on the small table in the corner of his room, exactly where he had imagined it. He lit the wick. He sat back to admire it. It was beautiful. That first night, he could not look away. He watched the flame for a long time. He thought, again and again, that all the seasons of saving had been worth it. On the second night, he was tired from his work. He lit the lamp out of habit. He glanced at it once or twice. He thought, briefly, that it was beautiful, and then he ate his rice and went to bed. On the third night, he forgot to look at the lamp at all. A season passed. The lamp became part of the room. He still lit it in the evenings, because it gave him light to eat by. But he no longer saw it. It had become furniture. It had become ordinary. One evening, his old master came to visit. The master sat down on a low stool and looked around the small room. His eyes paused on the lamp. "Beautiful," he said quietly. The young apprentice looked at the lamp, almost surprised. He realized he had forgotten that it was beautiful. "It is," he said slowly. "I used to think so." The master smiled. "What changed?" he asked. The young apprentice thought for a long moment. "Nothing," he said at last. "Nothing changed. The lamp is exactly as it was. I am the one who is different. I do not see it as I used to." The master nodded. "And what was it that made the lamp beautiful before?" The apprentice was quiet for a long while. "My wanting," he said finally. "It was my wanting that made it shine." "Yes," the master said. "The beauty was never in the lamp. The beauty was in the wanting. And when the wanting eased, the lamp became what it had always been. A small object on a table. The young apprentice sat with this for a long time. He looked at the lamp, and he saw it more clearly than he had ever seen it. It was just bronze. It was just metal a craftsman had shaped. The shining had come from his own heart. He looked at his master. "How much of what I think is in the world is actually in me?" he asked. The master smiled. "That," he said, "is the right question." This is one of the great quiet teachings of the Buddhist and Zen traditions. The mind is a constant maker of meaning. It does not show us the world as it is. It shows us the world dressed in the clothes of our wanting, our fearing, our remembering, our hoping. This is not a flaw in the mind. It is what the mind is for. The mind makes meaning so that we can navigate, so that we can love, so that we can care for what matters. We could not live, even for a single morning, without the constant work of the mind giving shape to the world. But here is the teaching. The shape it gives is not always the true shape of what is there. The lamp the young apprentice loved was not exactly the lamp he eventually owned. The lamp he loved had been built half by the merchant and half by his own longing. This is true of almost everything we touch. The home that seems plain to us would look like a palace to someone with nothing. The food that bores us would be a feast to a hungry stranger. The person beside us, whom we may have stopped noticing, would be the great love of someone else's life. The day we are calling ordinary might be, for someone else somewhere, the day they had been longing for all their life. None of these things are illusions. The home is real. The food is real. The person is real. But our experience of them is built. It is woven from 1,000 small threads of memory and habit and expectation. When we begin to see this, something gentle happens. We begin to suspect that our sufferings are not always as solid as we thought. The thing we cannot let go of may not be quite what we believe it to be. The lack we feel may have less to do with what is actually missing and more to do with what the mind has decided we need. The Buddha called this seeing into the nature of things. The Zen teachers called it waking up. It does not require any change in the world. The lamp does not need to be different. The home does not need to be larger. The food does not need to be richer. The person beside us does not need to become someone else. Only the seeing changes. And when the seeing changes, the grip on the world quietly loosens. There is another small story about a man sitting alone in a courtyard at night. He had returned to a small inn after a long day of travel. The courtyard of the inn was empty. The other guests had gone to their rooms. The keeper had banked the kitchen fire and gone to bed. The man sat on a stone bench, listening to the quiet. After a while, he became aware of a sound. It came from somewhere in the dark beyond the courtyard wall. A small, soft rustle. Then nothing. Then again, a few moments later, a small, soft rustle. The man listened. He could not tell what the sound was. At first, his mind reached for explanations. A small animal in the grass. A wind moving through the branch of a tree. A piece of cloth lifted by the breeze and then settling again. Each guess gave the sound a different quality. When he thought it might be a small animal, he felt a soft curiosity, almost an affection, as if a creature were keeping him gentle company. When he thought it might be wind in the trees, he felt the spaciousness of the night. When he thought, briefly, that it might be someone moving outside the wall, his heart quickened. The sound itself had not changed. Only the meaning the mind had given it had changed. He sat with this for a long time. The sound continued, rising and falling in the dark. He stopped trying to name it. He simply listened. And as he listened, he noticed something he had not noticed before. Underneath all his guessing, there had been a small, steady tension, a leaning forward of the mind, trying to know. When the leaning eased, the sound became something different again. Not a thing to identify, just a sound, a small rustle in the night. He felt, in that moment, that he had been doing something like this his whole life. Not just with sounds, with everything. The mind reaching, naming, deciding what each thing was. The constant quiet labor of turning the raw world into a world he could understand. He sat for a long time in the cool dark. He listened to the small rustling, and to his own breath, and to the distant call of an owl, and to nothing at all. In the morning, he found that he had slept very deeply on the stone bench. The Buddha taught that the freedom we are looking for does not come from changing the world. It comes from seeing the world more clearly. When we see how much of what we call experience is shaped in our own mind, we begin to hold it all more lightly. The treasure we longed for becomes simpler. The loss we feared becomes lighter. The slight we could not forgive begins to seem like a story we have been telling ourselves. This is not a cold seeing. It is not a turning away from love. The young apprentice did not stop caring for the lamp. He simply saw it for what it was and was no longer caught by the wanting. The man in the courtyard did not stop listening. He simply stopped grasping after each sound, and the night opened up around him. This is what the Zen teachers meant when they spoke of seeing things as they are. It is one of the simplest teachings and one of the most freeing. The world we struggle with is partly a world of our own making. And so the freedom we seek is partly available right now, simply by noticing how much we have been adding. The Buddha said that all things are made by the mind. He did not mean that the world is not there. He meant that what we experience as the world is woven from our own meaning-making, every moment, without rest. When we begin to see this, the holding eases all by itself. We do not have to push anything away. We do not have to become anyone different. The grip loosens because there is less to grip onto than we had thought. Let us rest here a moment. There is nothing to figure out. The seeing softens by itself when the mind is quiet enough to let it. When you are ready, we will continue together. The smallest acts of kindness can change the shape of an entire day. A stranger holding a door for us. A small smile offered across a counter. Someone asking how we are and actually waiting for the answer. These small moments seem so ordinary that we rarely think much about them. But they are the threads that hold the human heart together. Most of us have learned, somewhere along the way, to live with a quiet thirst for this kind of warmth. We do not always notice the thirst. It sits underneath the days, very softly, shaping how we move through the world. We work a little harder than we need to. We dress a little more carefully than we need to. We say yes to things we did not really want to do. Underneath much of this is a small hope. A hope that someone, somewhere, will offer us the warmth we are waiting for. The Buddha noticed how much these small moments mattered. He spoke often about a particular quality of heart called metta. The word is sometimes translated as loving kindness, but this does not quite capture it. Metta is a quiet warmth toward all beings. It is the wish that they might be well. It is the soft, steady benevolence that lets us walk through the world without armor. The Buddha taught that this quality is one of the great refuges of human life. When peace cannot be found anywhere else, it can be found here. When the world feels cold, we can find shelter in the warmth we carry within ourselves. But there is a turn in this teaching that often surprises people. Before we can offer warmth to the stranger, to the loved one, to the people we are trying to help, we must first offer it to ourselves. There is a story that comes from a small temple in an old mountain country. In that temple, a woman had been the cook for 40 years. She had prepared 3 meals a day for hundreds of monks and visitors. She knew the temple's rhythms the way a mother knows her own children. She knew when the rice would be ready. She knew which fires burned hottest. She knew the small sounds the kettles made before the water boiled. But in all those 40 years, no one had ever thanked her properly. The monks would come in to eat. They would bow over their bowls and eat in silence. They would rise and leave. The dining hall would empty, and she would return to her pots. One evening, a young novice came into the kitchen looking for hot water. He had been at the temple for several years and had begun to feel weary. He could not seem to find the peace the older monks seemed to have. He moved through his days carrying a quiet, unspoken hope that someone would notice him, would tell him he was doing well, would help him feel that he belonged. The cook saw the tiredness in his face. She poured him a cup of tea and asked him to sit. He sat. He looked at his hands. He could not quite name what he was feeling. "How do you do it?" he asked finally. 40 years. 3 meals a day. The same kitchen. The same pots. How do you stay so steady? The cook smiled. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat down across from him. "I will tell you a story," she said. "It is my own story. Perhaps it will be useful to you." The young novice nodded. "When I came here 40 years ago," the cook began, "I was very young. I had been told that this temple was a place of great peace. I came hoping that the monks would teach me. I came hoping that the place itself would change me. I came hoping that something here would fill me up. She took a small sip of tea. For my first year, I waited. I cooked and I waited. I cooked the rice and I waited for someone to notice. I scrubbed the pots and I waited for someone to say I had done well. I cleaned the dining hall and I waited for someone to thank me. She paused. No one did. The monks were not unkind. They were simply busy with their own practice. The cooking was just cooking to them. The clean hall was just a clean hall. I was a presence in the kitchen, doing what cooks do. She set her tea down. In my second year, I grew bitter. I thought about leaving. I felt invisible. I felt that all my work was for nothing, because no one was telling me that it mattered. I felt the way you feel now. The young novice looked up. He had not said anything to her about what he was feeling, but he could see she had read it from his face. Then one morning, the cook said, when I was very tired, I sat down on the kitchen step. The sun was just rising over the mountain. I watched the steam rise from the rice pot, and something quiet happened. I realized that I had been waiting my whole life for someone to bring me a kindness that I could give myself. She looked at him steadily. I had been hungry. I had been hungry for warmth, and the warmth had been right here in my own hands the whole time. The young novice was very still. From that morning on, she said, I stopped waiting. When I cooked the rice, I cooked it with love. Not love for the monks, who were not noticing. Love for myself. Love for the simple person standing at the stove. I gave myself the kindness I had been waiting 40 years to receive. And do you know what happened? The young novice shook his head. The work became different. The bitterness left. The waiting left. The kitchen stopped feeling like a place where I was overlooked. It became a place where I was at home, because I had stopped looking somewhere else for the warmth I needed. She looked at the novice with great kindness. You came here hoping the temple would change you. The temple cannot change you. The monks cannot change you. Even the Buddha himself cannot change you. The warmth you are looking for is something only you can offer to yourself. And the moment you start offering it, you will discover where it has actually been living. The young novice sat with this for a long time. He drank his tea slowly. The kitchen grew quiet around them. The fire shifted in its bed. When at last he stood, he bowed to the cook with a depth he had not bowed with before. He left the kitchen and walked back to his small room. He did not become enlightened that night, but something quietly shifted. From that evening on, when he sat down at the start of his day, he placed his hands gently on his knees. And before any thought arose, he silently offered himself a simple wish. May I be well. May I be at ease. May I be kind to the person I am today. It was the beginning of his real path. The Buddha taught that the warmth of metta should begin with the self. This is one of the most consistently overlooked parts of his teaching. In the traditional form of this practice, a person would sit quietly and offer warm wishes outward. May all beings be well. May they be free from suffering. May they find peace. These wishes were offered first to oneself, then to loved ones, then to neutral people, then to those one found difficult, and finally to all beings everywhere. The order matters. The Buddha did not begin with all beings. He began with the one being whose well-being is most in our care, the one being whose suffering we can do the most about, the one being who walks beside us every step, from the day we are born until the day our journey ends. Ourselves. Many people find this hard. They have been taught that focusing kindness on themselves is selfish, indulgent, somehow against the spirit of practice. But the Buddha taught the opposite. He said that we cannot give what we do not have. The water we offer others must come from our own well. If our well is dry, our offering will be thin. The cook in the story discovered this slowly. For 40 years she waited for someone outside her to fill the well. No one did. They never would. It was only when she began to draw water from her own well, lovingly, that she became the steady, warm presence the temple had been quietly missing. This is not a small teaching. It changes how we live. When we stop waiting for the world to give us the kindness we need, an entire dimension of our suffering eases. We stop feeling invisible. We stop feeling overlooked. We stop measuring our worth by who is or is not noticing us. We become, slowly, our own first refuge. The Zen teachers had a saying about this. They said that the friend you are looking for is the one who is reading these words. The kindness you are waiting for is in the hand that turns the page. The recognition you long for is available, right now, from the one place it has always been available. There is a small story about a weary traveler and an innkeeper. The traveler had been walking for many days through cold and difficult country. He arrived one evening at a small inn high in the mountains. The wind was bitter. His clothes were wet through. His feet ached. The innkeeper opened the door. She was an older woman with a quiet face. She took one look at the traveler and said, simply, "Come in. Rest now." She did not ask his name. She did not ask his business. She did not ask where he had come from or where he was going. She led him to a wooden bench by the fire. She brought him a thick bowl of broth and a cup of warm water. She put a folded blanket over his shoulders. She did not stand there waiting for thanks. She returned to her work. The traveler ate the broth slowly. He felt the warmth move through him. He felt his shoulders begin to soften. He felt something he had not felt in many weeks. He felt that someone, somewhere, was simply glad he was alive. He stayed at the inn for 2 nights. He hardly spoke to the innkeeper. She hardly spoke to him. There was no need. When he set out again, he carried the memory of that bowl of broth with him for the rest of his life. Not because the broth had been remarkable, because it had been offered without conditions, because someone had welcomed him without needing him to be anything other than what he was. Many years later, when he was old, he understood that this was the kind of welcome he had been hungry for his whole life. And he understood, finally, that he could offer it to himself. Each morning, in the quiet before the day began, he would sit for a moment and welcome himself with the same simple words the innkeeper had used. "Come in. Rest now. You are here." This is the soft turn at the heart of the Buddhist teaching on kindness. The friend we have been looking for is not somewhere else. We do not have to find them. We do not have to deserve them. We can simply become them, for ourselves, in any quiet moment. This is not a heavy practice. It does not require any belief. It requires only that we begin to notice how often we treat the person inside us with a sharpness or impatience we would never use with someone we love. It requires only that we begin, here and there, to soften that tone. To greet ourselves with the simple warmth the innkeeper offered the cold traveler. Come in. Rest now. You are here. When this softening begins to happen, something else begins to happen too. The longing we sat with earlier, the quiet ache of feeling separate, begins to ease. Not because the world has changed, because we have stopped withholding from ourselves the very thing we were searching the world to receive. The Buddha said that one who has not learned to be a friend to themselves cannot truly be a friend to anyone. The warmth must begin in our own hands. The kindness must begin in our own hearts. The welcome must begin at our own door. This is one of the great quiet gifts of the Buddhist tradition. There is a friend waiting to meet us. The friend has been waiting our whole life. The friend is closer than the next breath. The friend is the one who has been carrying us all along. There is something else worth noticing here. Once we begin to offer ourselves this quiet warmth, the warmth begins to spill outward, almost on its own. We become softer with the people around us. We become more patient with strangers. We become less hungry for praise, less wounded by indifference, less driven by the small need to be seen. The well, once filled, begins to overflow. The kindness we feared was selfish turns out to be the very thing that allows us to be truly kind to anyone else. And there is a deeper layer still. When we have become a steady friend to ourselves, the loneliness that has driven so many of our reachings begins to ease. We are not waiting for someone to arrive and rescue us from being alone with ourselves. We have made friends with the one who is always here. From that quiet companionship, the world begins to look different. People are no longer asked to be more than they can be. Solitude is no longer feared. The ordinary moments of a day are no longer empty, because we are not empty. We have come home to the one place we had not yet thought to look. Let us rest here for a moment. There is no warmth to find. There is no kindness to earn. What we have been searching for is closer than the breath in the chest. When you are ready, we will continue together. A particular feeling visits almost every person, though few of us ever name it. It can arrive in the middle of a happy evening. It can arrive in a crowded room full of friends. It can arrive on a perfectly ordinary morning when nothing in particular is wrong. It is the quiet sense, just for a moment, of being on the outside of things, of being here, but not quite here, of being among the people we love and still feeling, somewhere underneath, a small ache of separateness. This feeling is one of the oldest things in the human heart. It is what makes us reach. It is what makes us want to belong. It is what drives so much of what we do, even when we cannot quite name it. It is the reason we hold on to people for too long, the reason we cling to objects that have stopped meaning what they once meant, the reason we sometimes cannot let go of a memory, even a painful one, because letting it go feels like losing the thread that connects us to ourselves. The Buddha was very tender about this feeling. He did not call it weakness. He did not tell people to stop having it. He saw it as one of the deepest currents in human life, and he spent many years helping his students understand where it came from and what it asked of them. This is the ache that makes us grasp at things. The ache that makes us want to hold something tightly. The ache that drives most of what the Buddhist teachers called clinging. It is not a moral failing. It is a kind of homesickness, a quiet longing to feel, somewhere inside, that we belong. There was once a young scribe who set out on a long journey through the forested hill country of an ancient kingdom. He was carrying a satchel of scrolls to a temple many days' walk away. He had never traveled alone before. On the second evening, as he was making a small fire by the side of the road, an older man came up the path. He had grey in his beard and a quiet way of walking. He carried a small bundle and a wooden staff. He asked if he might share the fire. The young scribe was grateful for company. He boiled water and shared his rice. The older man told stories of places he had been. The young scribe listened, asking questions. The fire burned low. The stars came out above the trees. They walked together the next morning, and the next, and the next. It became their pattern. Each morning, the older man waited until the young scribe was ready. They moved at the young man's pace. In the evenings, they made camp together, shared food, and talked into the dark. The young scribe learned things about the world he had not known. The older man asked questions that made him think. Something quiet and good settled between them. Within a week, the young scribe realized he had begun to count on the older man's company. The road no longer felt long. The evenings no longer felt empty. He had stopped worrying about the journey at all, because the journey had become something different. It had become this companionship. He began to think about how it would be when they reached the temple together. He pictured them arriving side by side. He pictured himself telling the temple keepers about his wise companion. He pictured staying together for many days more, perhaps. Perhaps the older man would even travel on with him from there. On the morning of the 8th day, they came to a place where the road forked. One way went on through the forest. The other turned south, toward distant hills hazy with morning mist. The older man stopped. "My road goes that way," he said, pointing south. The young scribe felt something he had not expected to feel. Something tight in his chest. A small panic. "But," he said, "I thought you were going on to the temple." The older man smiled gently. "I never said that," he said. "We were walking the same road for a while. Now we walk different roads." The young scribe did not know what to say. He looked at his companion. He looked at the road south. He felt suddenly very young and very alone. The older man set down his bundle. He looked at the young scribe with great kindness. "You have begun to hold," he said. "I can see it in your face. You have begun to think that what we have was something you could carry with you." The young scribe could not speak. The older man's words were exactly true. "We have walked together for 8 days," the older man said. 8 good days. 8 days of food shared and stories told and a fire we built each evening. None of that is gone. It is not anywhere to be lost. It happened. It is part of you now." He paused. "But this morning we come to a fork. You will walk one way. I will walk another. This is not a sadness. This is what roads do. They meet. They part. The mistake is to grip the meeting so tightly that the parting becomes a wound." The young scribe sat down on a stone by the roadside. He felt the truth of what the older man had said, and he also felt the ache of it. They were both there at the same time. "I do not want you to go," he said quietly. "I know," said the older man, "and I am going. But I will tell you something a Zen teacher once told me, many years ago. The road is not made for keeping company. The road is made for walking. The company that arrives is a gift. The company that leaves is also a gift, though it takes us longer to see this. He bent down and put his hand on the young scribe's shoulder. "Walk on," he said. "Carry what we shared, but do not carry me. I am too heavy for the rest of your road, and you do not need me. You never did." He picked up his bundle and turned south. The young scribe watched him grow smaller against the morning hills. After a long while, when the older man was a small dot far down the southern road, the young scribe stood up. He shouldered his satchel. He turned toward the forest. He walked on. He thought, as he moved through the trees, that he was carrying a different kind of weight now, lighter than the ache he had felt at the fork, heavier than the simple weight of his scrolls, something like a memory that knew how to travel beside him without slowing him down. By the time he reached the temple, many days later, he had begun to understand what the older man had meant. The 8 days had not been taken from him. They had been given to him. The giving had been the whole point. The trying to hold them was what had made them feel like a loss. He had not seen this clearly while it was happening, but he saw it now, and he was grateful in a way that had no sadness in it. This is something the Buddha taught about in many ways. We come into the world with what feels like a thin sheet of separation between ourselves and everything else. We are over here. The world is over there. The people we love are over there. The moments that matter are over there. We are watching through our own eyes, and the watching itself creates a sense of being a little apart from what we see. From this feeling of being slightly outside, a particular hunger grows. We want to bond. We want to fasten ourselves to things. We want to belong so completely that the thin sheet of separation might dissolve. We reach for people, for places, for objects, for moments, hoping that by holding them tightly enough, the lonely feeling might pass. It rarely passes. The grip itself reminds us of the separation. The reaching itself confirms that something feels far away. This is the ache that drives so much of human life. It is not a flaw. It is one of the deepest currents in us. The Buddhist teachers were tender about it. They did not say we should not feel it. They said we should understand it. What we are really longing for, they taught, is not the thing itself. It is the feeling of being held, the feeling of being inside life rather than outside it, the feeling of mattering, of being woven in, of not being a small visitor on the surface of things. This is why no amount of possessing has ever quite filled the longing. The young scribe did not really want the older man. He wanted the feeling of not being alone. The older man had given him a taste of that feeling, and the young scribe had mistaken the taste for the thing itself. We do this constantly. We reach for the lover when what we want is to feel less separate. We reach for the achievement when what we want is to feel that we matter. We reach for the perfect home when what we want is to feel that we have a place. The longing is real. It is not wrong. But the things we are reaching for are usually only the shadows of what we are truly longing for. There is a small reflection that Buddhist teachers sometimes offered to their students. They would ask them to consider what it really means to have something. Consider an ox cart, they might say. You purchase the cart. You bring it home. You say the cart is yours. But what does this mean? In a few years, the wheels will need replacing. In 10 years, the wood will begin to age. Eventually, the cart will pass entirely from your hands. While you had it, you did not actually possess it. You used it. You shared time with it. It accompanied you for a while. Then it was time for it to be no more. Consider a horse you care for. You feed it. You name it. You ride it for years. It carries you through good seasons and difficult ones. You think of the horse as yours. But the horse has its own life, its own breathing, its own being. You do not own it. You walk beside it for some years, and then your time together ends. Consider a fine cloak. You wear it. You feel it on your shoulders. You think of it as part of you, but it is not part of you. It is a length of woven cloth that has come to rest on your shoulders for a season of your life. Even the things we say we have are not really had. They are met. They are shared with us. They are woven through our days for a while, and then they continue along their own quiet movement through time, and we continue along ours. This is not a sad teaching. It is a clarifying one. When we see that nothing was ever really ours, the grip eases. We can love what we have without the constant background fear of losing it. We can welcome what comes without the panic of having to keep it forever. The Buddha once said that life is like a river. The water that touched our feet a moment ago is already downstream. The water that touches our feet now will be gone in another moment. This is not a teaching about loss. It is a teaching about reality. Things move. People move. We move. The river of life is always flowing, and nothing in it stays in one place. What hurts us is not the flowing. What hurts us is the trying to make things stay. This is what the young scribe began to learn at the fork in the road. The pain was not in the parting. The pain was in his grip. When he could finally hold his 8 days lightly, accepting that they had been a gift rather than a possession, the ache softened. Something else took its place. Something close to gratitude. Something close to peace. The longing to belong does not disappear when we see this. We are still human. We will still feel the small ache from time to time. But the seeing changes how we hold the ache. It becomes part of our humanity rather than a problem to solve. It becomes a small visiting feeling rather than the engine of our entire lives. The Zen teachers like to say that the seeker who tries to bind everything to himself ends up bound. The seeker who lets things come and go ends up free. The freedom they spoke of is not a freedom from caring. It is the opposite. It is the freedom to care fully, with both hands open, knowing that nothing we love was ever ours to keep, and that this does not make the loving any less real. There is a phrase from the Buddhist tradition that captures this. The teachers used to say that everything we meet is a guest. The morning is a guest. The friend is a guest. The meal is a guest. The whole of this one life is a guest in our hands. We welcome the guest. We feed the guest. We enjoy the guest's company. And when it is time for the guest to leave, we do not chase the guest down the road. We bow. We thank. We continue. The young scribe at the fork in the road was learning, in his small way, to be a host like this. To welcome what comes. To enjoy what stays. To let go gently when the time arrives for it to leave. Most of us spend a long time learning this. Some of us are still learning it on our last day. But every small moment of letting a guest depart with grace, instead of clinging to them at the door, is a small lifting of the weight we have been carrying. And in the end, this is what the heart was longing for all along. Not to keep everything, to love it well while it is here. Let us rest here for a moment. The longing the heart carries is gentle and very old. There is nothing to do with it. It can simply sit alongside us like a quiet companion. When you are ready, we will continue together. Most of us think of happiness as something that comes from outside. A good meal, a warm bath, a pleasant conversation, the first sip of cool water on a hot day. These are the simple pleasures of being alive. There is nothing wrong with them, but they have one quiet feature we rarely notice. They all depend on something outside us. They depend on the right conditions arriving in the right way, at the right time. The Buddha pointed at this gently. He said that there are actually two great streams of feeling that move through every human life, and most of us live almost entirely on only one of them. The first stream comes through the senses. It is the warmth of sun on the skin, the taste of warm rice, the pleasure of soft cloth against the body, the comfort of sinking into a familiar bed after a long day. These pleasures are real. They are part of what makes a human life beautiful. But this first stream depends entirely on the world. It arrives when conditions are right. It leaves when conditions change. We do not have much say over it. We can try to arrange our days to encourage it, but we cannot make the warmth stay when the cold comes. We cannot make the meal taste good when we are not hungry. We cannot keep the soft cloth pleasant when the body has grown sore. This stream gives us much, but it cannot be held. The second stream is something else entirely. It comes from inside. It arises not from what touches the body, but from what moves in the heart and mind. And it has a quality the Buddha thought worth pointing out very carefully. It does not depend on the world giving us anything. It is ours to draw from whenever we wish. There was once a young monk who had been at his monastery for several years. He had come hoping to find peace, but lately he had begun to feel restless and dull. The days felt long. The rice tasted the same. The bell rang for meditation, and his heart did not lift as it once had. He could not understand it. He had everything he had once thought he wanted. A quiet place to live, time to study, companions who shared his path, and yet something in him had grown thin and faded. He was waiting for something. He did not know what. One morning, walking back from the well with his small portion of bread for the day, he passed a younger novice sitting on the steps of the meditation hall. The novice was perhaps 12 years old. He had only been at the monastery a few months. He looked at the older monk's bread with the unguarded hunger of a growing boy. The young monk did not think very much about what he did next. He simply walked over to the novice, broke his bread in two, and handed half to him. "For you," he said. "I have already eaten." It was not true. He had not eaten, but something in him had wanted to say it. The novice's eyes brightened. He bowed quickly. He took the bread and ate it slowly, with great pleasure. The young monk walked on toward his small cell. He did not think much about the bread. He sat down for his morning meditation. He felt slightly hungry. He did not particularly mind. But something curious happened during the day. A quiet brightness sat inside him. It did not come from anything. He had not received any praise. No one knew what he had done. The novice had not even thanked him properly. The bread was gone. He was hungrier than usual. And yet, all morning, every time he turned his attention inward, there was this small warm light. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was simply there. He found himself looking at the trees in the courtyard with more affection than usual. He found himself listening to the bell ring with a softer ear. The walk to the meditation hall, which had felt long and dull for many months, felt almost pleasant. He could not understand it. In the evening, he went to see one of the older monks, a teacher who had been at the monastery for many years and whose face was full of small lines from much smiling. "Teacher," he said, "something strange has happened to me today." The old monk poured him tea. "Sit," he said. "Tell me." The young monk told him about the bread. He told him about the small brightness that had stayed with him all day. He told him that he could not understand where it had come from. The act had been so small. He had not expected to feel anything in particular. The old monk smiled gently. "You have stumbled into one of the great quiet teachings of the Buddha," he said. "Have you not been wondering why your life has felt thin?" The young monk nodded. "You have been living on one stream of feeling," the old monk said. "The stream that comes through the senses. The taste of food, the warmth of the fire, the comfort of a familiar room. This stream is real and it gives us many gifts, but it has a particular feature. It is not within our hands. It comes and goes by conditions outside us. When we try to live on this stream alone, we eventually grow thin because we cannot control it. And because, after a while, even the pleasures it brings begin to feel ordinary." He paused. "There is another stream," he said. "You touched it this morning." The young monk waited. "The act of giving the bread did not change anything in your senses. The taste of nothing in your mouth was not better than the taste of bread. The cold morning was no warmer. The walk to the hall was no shorter. And yet you felt something pleasant, something steady, something the senses had not given you." He looked at the young monk with great kindness. That was the other stream, the feeling that comes from inside. The feeling that arises not from what touches the body, but from what moves in the heart. The young monk sat with this for a long moment. "And this other stream," he said slowly, "it comes from doing kind things. It comes from many places," the old monk said. "Generosity is one. Honesty is another. Patience, forgiveness, the simple intention to wish another being well. Each of these has a quiet warmth that comes with it. Each of them is a small drink from the second stream. And the great gift of this stream is that it does not depend on the world giving you anything. You draw from it yourself. You always can." The young monk left his teacher's room and walked slowly back to his cell. The night air was cool. The stars were very clear. He thought about how much of his life he had spent trying to arrange the first stream, trying to get the right meal, the right room, the right companions, the right amount of quiet at the right time, trying to make the outside arrange itself into the shape that would finally bring him what he wanted. He had hardly noticed the second stream at all. From that night on, he began to notice. Not in a grand way. He did not become a different person. He simply began to see the small moments when he could choose to draw a cup of water from the second stream, a patient word with another monk, a small task done with care instead of with grumbling, a wish offered silently for someone who was struggling. Each of these small acts brought with it the same quiet brightness he had felt after the bread. None of them depended on the world giving him anything. They were his to give to himself. Simply by giving them, his life did not become easier, but it became fuller, and he understood, slowly, that he had been thirsty all along for a water he had been carrying himself. This is one of the great quiet discoveries of the Buddhist tradition. There are two streams of feeling available to us. One comes from outside. One comes from within. The Buddhist teachers called the first stream samisa, or feeling associated with the world of the senses. It is what we usually think of as pleasure, the taste of good food, the comfort of warm clothing, the pleasure of company we enjoy. It is real and it matters. The Buddha did not say we should reject this stream. He himself was kind to his own body. He accepted food when it was offered. He sat in the shade when the sun was hot. But he saw clearly that this stream alone cannot sustain a heart. It is too unsteady. It comes and goes by conditions that are not in our hands. If we depend on it entirely, we live in a state of quiet anxiety, always trying to arrange the outside world into the shape that will give us what we need. And even when we succeed, the pleasure fades. The body grows used to comfort. The same meal that delighted us yesterday is unremarkable today. The same pleasant evening that filled our heart last week passes almost unnoticed now. The second stream they called niramisa, or feeling that does not depend on the world of the senses. It is the warmth that arises when we are honest. The clear pleasure that comes with a generous act, even a very small one. The soft satisfaction of patience. The brightness of letting go of a grudge. The quiet of doing the right thing simply because it is right. These are not abstract pleasures. They are felt in the body. They warm the chest. They ease the shoulders. They bring something close to a brightness behind the eyes. But unlike the first stream, they do not depend on anything outside us. We can draw from them at any moment. The Buddha said this stream is a great refuge. When the outer world is hard, when conditions are not in our favor, when nothing pleasant is happening to us, we still have this. We can still be honest. We can still be patient. We can still offer a small kindness, even silently. And each of these brings its own quiet warmth, regardless of whether anyone notices, regardless of whether the world rewards us, regardless of whether the conditions of our day are easy or difficult. There is a small story that shows this clearly. It is about a farmer in an ancient village whose crops failed one summer. The rains had not come. By autumn, the fields stood pale and empty. He would have nothing to harvest. His neighbors expected him to grow bitter. They came to console him. But when they arrived at his house, they found him sitting in his small garden, mending a broken fence. He was humming quietly. He had brought out tea for the visitors he knew would come. "Are you not heavy with sorrow?" they asked. The farmer looked up and smiled. "The crops have failed," he said. "It is true. The harvest will be small or nothing. The winter will be a hard one." He paused. "But the wheat was only one of the gifts the field gave me this summer. The field also gave me the smell of the warm earth in the mornings. The field gave me the small bees that came to the flowers at the edge of the rows. The field gave me long hours of walking my own paths and thinking my own thoughts. The wheat is gone, but all the rest is still here. The field has not stopped giving. I have just stopped expecting only one kind of giving from it. His neighbors sat with him for a long time. They drank his tea. They watched the slow afternoon light move across the empty fields. When they went home that evening, they understood something they had not understood before. The farmer had been carrying his own well of warmth into the difficult season. He did not need the harvest to be steady. He had been steady the whole time. The harvest had been a gift on top of his steadiness. Its absence had simply revealed what had been there all along. The first stream had run thin for him that summer, but his second stream was full. This is the great soft gift of the second stream. It is always available. It does not require the world to be kind. It does not require us to be in pleasant circumstances. It does not require anyone to notice what we are doing. It asks only the simplest thing: the intention to draw from it, the willingness to offer a small kindness, a small honesty, a small patience in the place where we already are. This is part of why the Buddhist teaching on letting go has so little of the grim or self-denying about it. Letting go of the constant arranging of the outer world does not leave us with nothing. It leaves us with a quiet richness no rearranging could ever give us. The young monk in the story did not become better at controlling the conditions of his life. He simply discovered that he had been ignoring half of what was available to him, the half that was already in his hands. The Zen teachers said that the second stream is like a small spring running underneath the surface of every life. We can spend our days walking over it without noticing, or we can pause and listen and drink from it whenever we wish. When we begin to drink from it, the desperate need to arrange the first stream begins to ease. We can still enjoy the good meal. We can still appreciate the warm room. But we are no longer dependent on these things for our sense of being well. We have somewhere else to turn. We have a well of our own. And the world, with all its changing conditions, becomes a little easier to meet. Let us rest here a moment. There is a stream within us. It has been there even when we forgot it. There is nothing to do with this knowledge for now. It can simply settle in, slowly. When you are ready, we will continue together. Have you ever caught yourself doing something and thought, that was just like my father, or my mother, or my grandmother, or an old teacher? The lift of the shoulders, the sigh when we are tired, the small phrase we reach for when we are surprised. So much of what we call ourselves, when we look closely, turns out to be borrowed. It goes deeper than gestures. Whole ways of feeling come down through us this way, whole ways of meeting the world. Some of us grow tense when someone raises a voice. Others apologize before they have done anything wrong. Many of us carry a quiet certainty that we must always be useful in order to be welcome. These things were taught to us by people who had been taught them in turn, often without anyone meaning to teach them at all. The Buddha pointed at something deep about this. He said that what we call the self is not what it appears to be. It is not a single solid thing. It is more like a great bundle of patterns that arrived in us over many years. Patterns of feeling and thinking, of moving through the body, of reacting to the world. Most of these patterns we did not choose. They came to us through our parents, our teachers, our village, our times. They were absorbed before we knew we were absorbing them. By the time we were old enough to ask who we were, the answer had largely been put together for us already. The Buddhist teachers had a word for this. They called it sankara. We have met the word before. It means formed, built, put together. The self, they said, is a sankara. It was built. It is being built, in fact, in every moment, by the same old patterns repeating themselves through us. This sounds like a strange teaching. It can also sound a little unsettling, but there is a great gentleness in it, because what was built can also be set down. What was inherited can also be released. The patterns that came to us without our asking can begin, slowly, to soften. There is a story about a young man who grew up in the home of his grandfather. The grandfather was a quiet, dignified man who had spent many years studying the old wisdom and was respected throughout the surrounding hills. When the young man was a small boy, his grandfather took him in and raised him with great care. The grandfather had a particular way of being in the world. He walked slowly with his back very straight. He spoke softly, with long pauses between his words. He held his hands in a particular manner when he was thinking, the fingers loose, resting in his lap. When something difficult happened, he received it with a quiet nod, and then sat with it for a while before he responded. The boy grew up watching all of this. He absorbed it as a sponge absorbs water. By the time he was a young man, he walked slowly with a very straight back. He spoke softly with long pauses. He held his hands loose in his lap when he was thinking. When something difficult happened, he received it with a quiet nod. He did not know he was doing any of these things. They simply felt like who he was. When the grandfather grew very old, he prepared to leave the village to live in a small hermitage in the high mountains for his final years. Before he went, he gave the young man his old robe. It was a simple thing. Dark cloth, worn soft at the edges. It still smelled faintly of the grandfather's hands and the cooking fire of their home. "Wear it," the grandfather said. "It has been a friend to me." The young man wore the robe. He wore it for years. The robe became part of him. The robe and the slow walk and the soft speech and the quiet hands and the steady nod all became part of how he knew himself in the world. People who met him said he had a great steadiness. They said he reminded them of a quieter time. Some came to him for advice, as they had once come to his grandfather. He gave the advice his grandfather would have given. He used the phrases his grandfather had used. He paused before he spoke, just as his grandfather had paused. For many years he did not think about any of this. He simply lived inside his life, doing what felt natural, being who he felt himself to be. One spring afternoon, when he was perhaps 35 years old, he went down to the river to bathe. The day was warm. The water was running clear. He set his robe down on a flat, smooth stone at the river's edge. He took off his sandals. He waded into the water. The river was cold and clean. He bent and splashed water on his face and his shoulders. When he had washed, he stood for a moment, simply being in the water, looking back toward the bank. The robe lay on the stone in the sunlight. From the water, he could see it clearly. It was just cloth. Worn, dark, familiar cloth. Without him inside it, it had no particular dignity. It had no particular steadiness. It was a piece of fabric that had once belonged to his grandfather and now belonged, he supposed, to him. He looked down at his own reflection in the still water near the bank. He saw a man, wet hair, bare shoulders, a face he did not always recognize. Without the robe, without the way of standing, without the careful posture his grandfather had given him, He was simply a man in a river, looking at himself. And something quiet opened in him. He had not been seen by himself, without the borrowed clothing, for a very long time. Possibly never. He stood very still in the cold water. He looked at the man in the reflection. He thought about all the years he had spent walking his grandfather's walk, speaking his grandfather's speech, receiving difficult news with his grandfather's quiet nod. He had thought all of this was who he was. But now, standing here, with the robe on the stone behind him, he saw that the robe had been on him in more ways than one. He did not feel sad about this. He felt curious. He felt as if a great deal of weight he had not known he was carrying had eased from his shoulders. He thought to himself, slowly, I have been wearing my grandfather. I have been wearing his shape. I have been wearing his way of moving through the world. None of it was wrong. He was a good man, and his ways were good ways. But they were his. And underneath them, all this time, there has been someone else. Someone I have not yet met. He stood in the river for a long time. When he finally came back to the bank, he reached for the robe. He looked at it carefully. Then he put it on again, slowly, deliberately. He still wore it. He still cared for it. But he wore it now in a different way. He wore it knowing it was a robe, knowing it was something given, knowing it was not him. In the years that followed, he began to notice many things. He noticed which gestures were truly his own and which were his grandfather's. He noticed which words he used because he meant them and which because he had heard them used 1,000 times. He noticed which beliefs had come into him through his own thinking and which had been laid in him by others before he could choose. He did not throw any of it away. There was no need. He simply began to know it for what it was. And in the knowing, he began to become more himself, more truly than he had ever been when he had thought the robe was his skin. This is what the Buddhist teachers meant when they spoke of seeing the constructed nature of the self. We come into the world unformed. Almost immediately, the people around us begin to lay patterns in us. Patterns of feeling, of what is safe and what is dangerous, what to fear and what to long for. Patterns of thinking, of what to value, what to ignore, what to question, what to accept. Patterns of being, of how to walk, how to speak, how to hold the body, how to react when life is hard. By the time we are old enough to ask who we are, the answer has been mostly built for us. And like the young man in the story, we usually mistake the construction for who we really are. We mistake the robe for our skin. This is not anyone's fault. Our parents, our teachers, our communities did the only thing they could. They passed on what they had been given. They taught us what they knew. They shaped us with the same loving hands that had shaped them. There is nothing to blame in any of this. But there is something to see. When we begin to see how much of what we call ourselves is sankara, is built, is borrowed, something gentle happens. The grip we have on our identity begins to ease. We become less defensive. We become less attached to being right. We become less wounded when someone challenges what we believe. Because we begin to suspect, quietly, that what we believe was not entirely our own choice in the first place. This is one of the deepest forms of letting go that the Buddhist tradition speaks of. It is letting go of the constructed self, not destroying it, not pretending we have no self, simply seeing it for what it is, a robe we have been wearing, a robe we can continue to wear, but with our eyes open. The Buddha said that when this seeing arises, the suffering that comes from constantly defending the self begins to dissolve. We do not need to defend the self anymore. We have begun to know it is just a robe. There is another small story about a traveler who carried an old map. The traveler had found the map in his satchel when he first set out on the road, many years ago. He could not remember putting it there. It was already there, folded carefully, when he first opened the satchel. The map showed roads and rivers, cities and crossings, distances and dangers. It was very detailed. The traveler used it constantly. When the road forked, he consulted the map. When a city did not appear where he expected, he double-checked the map. When the landscape did not quite match what the map described, he assumed his own eyes were deceiving him. For many years, the map was the most important thing he owned. He trusted it more than he trusted his own seeing. One day, sitting by a riverbank to rest, he unfolded the map carefully and looked at it more closely than he ever had. He noticed something he had never noticed before. In the top corner, in small faded letters, the map gave the name of the country it described. It was not the country he was in. The map had been drawn for a place he had never been. The roads on the map were not the roads he was walking. The cities were not the cities he was passing through. He had been navigating his entire life by a map of somewhere else. He sat with this for a long time. Then, very gently, he folded the map. He did not throw it away. He simply put it back in his satchel. He did not need it anymore. He could see the road in front of him. He could trust his own eyes. He had not realized, until then, that he had been allowed to. This is what the Buddha was pointing at. So much of what we use to navigate our lives was drawn for a country we have never been. So much of what we believe about ourselves was put into us before we knew there was a question. So much of what feels like our identity is a map someone else folded into our satchel. There is nothing wrong with what was given. The grandfather's robe was a good robe. The map in the satchel was a careful map. The patterns laid in us by our parents and teachers were laid in love. None of it needs to be thrown away. But seeing it for what it is changes how we wear it. We stop confusing the robe for the body. We stop confusing the map for the country. We become a little more spacious, a little more honest, a little less tightly bound to a self we did not actually choose. The Zen teachers said that the moment we see this clearly, a strange relief enters the heart. The heaviness of having to be someone in particular begins to lift. We are still a person. We still have preferences and gestures and ways of being, but we no longer have to defend any of it. We can hold it as we hold a cloak on a cool evening, with appreciation, without confusion, and underneath the cloak, in the quiet, there is something we cannot name. Some unbuilt presence that does not need to be anyone in particular. The same presence that has been here, very quietly, all along, while we were busy being the person we thought we had to be. This is one of the small miracles of the Buddhist path. We do not become someone else. We do not strip away our personality and become blank. The robe stays. The voice stays. The history stays. But our relationship to it all changes. We move from being inside the robe, defending it, polishing it, fearing its loss, to standing a little behind it, holding it gently, knowing it for what it is. From this small distance, the whole weight of being someone in particular grows lighter. Let us rest here for a moment. There is no robe to remove. There is no map to throw away. The seeing softens by itself in its own time. When you are ready, we will continue together. The body has a long memory. Almost every person notices this, sooner or later. We find a tension in the shoulders that seems to have been there forever, a small clench in the jaw whenever we concentrate, a way of holding the breath when something difficult is about to be said. These were not random arrivals. They were laid down at some point, often very young, and the body has been carrying them ever since. This is one of the more delicate teachings of the Buddhist tradition. The mind and the body are not two separate things. What we feel in the mind, the body holds. What the body holds, the mind feels. The two move together, almost as one. The Buddha pointed at this many times. He taught that when a difficult emotion visits us, it does not stay only in the mind. It moves into the chest, into the shoulders, into the small muscles around the eyes, into the slight tightening at the base of the spine. The emotion arrives, the body records it, and then the emotion passes. But the recording stays. Over many years, these small recordings build up. They become the shape we are. The body we wake up in each morning is not just the body we were born with. It is also the body we have been quietly making for ourselves, one held breath at a time. This sounds like a heavy teaching, but like much of the Buddha's wisdom, it carries a quiet relief at its center. What the body has been making, the body can also slowly unmake. What was recorded can begin, gently, to be released. There is a story about an old man who had carried his shoulders high for as long as he could remember. He had been a busy man all his life. As a young man, he had worked in the markets, lifting heavy goods. As a middle-aged man, he had run a small shop and a household, always with 3 or 4 worries in his mind at once. As an old man, he had taken on the care of his grandchildren, the management of his small garden, the keeping of his accounts. His shoulders had always been there, high and tight, just under his ears. He did not think much about them. They were simply how his body was. When younger people offered him a chair, he would shrug and decline, and not notice that even the shrugging was tight. One evening, when he was very old, his small granddaughter took him by the hand and led him out to a quiet pond at the edge of their village. She wanted to show him how she had been learning to skip stones across the water. He sat down on a flat rock at the edge of the pond and watched her with the small, still smile of an old grandfather. After a while, she finished her stones and came to sit beside him. They watched the pond together. The light was soft. The air was cool. A leaf fell from a tree above them. It drifted down slowly and landed on the surface of the pond with a tiny sound. Small circles rippled outward from the place where it had touched the water. The old man and the small girl watched the circles spread. After a long moment, the circles faded. The surface of the pond grew still again. The old man kept watching, even after the circles were gone. He watched the surface settle back into the smoothness it had had before the leaf fell. There was something about how completely the pond returned to itself. The leaf had touched it. The water had moved. And then, without any effort, without any decision, the water had simply found its way back to being still. The stillness had always been there underneath the small disturbance. The pond had not needed to work at being calm. It had only needed to stop being moved. Something curious happened to the old man as he watched. He noticed, for the first time in many years, that his shoulders were high. He did not know why he had noticed it at that moment. Perhaps the stillness of the pond had made everything around him quieter. Perhaps watching the water find its way back to its own calm had reminded some part of him that calm was a possibility. He breathed out slowly. His shoulders lowered, just a little. He felt something strange. A small softening in a place he had not known was hard. He sat very still for a long time. He did not try to do anything. He simply watched the pond, noticed his shoulders, and breathed. With each breath out, his shoulders lowered a little more. After many breaths, they had settled into a position he could not remember them ever being in before. Loose, open, resting. The small granddaughter looked up at him. "Grandfather, what are you doing?" "I am settling," he said, slowly. "Like the pond, after the leaf." She did not quite understand, but she smiled, because his face had a softness in it she had not seen before. That night, when he lay down to sleep, he noticed that his shoulders settled back to their old high position almost at once. The lifetime of carrying them there did not undo itself in a single evening. But the next morning, when he sat down with his cup of tea, he remembered the pond. He let his shoulders soften, just a little, just for a moment. Each day he did this. Sometimes only once. Sometimes many times. He did not try to keep his shoulders down. He simply noticed, here and there, and let them settle, the same way the pond's surface had settled after the leaf. The settling was always small. The settling was always temporary. Within an hour or two, his shoulders would have climbed back to their old high position without him noticing. But the next time he remembered, he would soften them again. Each remembering was a small gift to a body that had been clenched for a very long time. A year passed. He sat one evening with his granddaughter again. She was older now. She no longer skipped stones. She sat beside him quietly, with the beginning stillness of a child who is learning how to be still. She looked at him for a long moment. "Grandfather," she said, "you look different." "Do I?" he said. "You look like you put something down." He laughed softly. He thought about all the years he had carried his shoulders high. He thought about the leaf and the circles and the slow returning of the pond to its own calm. "Yes," he said, "I think I did." This is something the Buddhist teachers spoke about often. The body is not separate from the work of letting go. In many ways, the body is where the work actually happens. The mind can understand a teaching in an instant. "Yes," we say. "I see. I understand." Holding tightly creates the loss. Peace is not somewhere else. Kindness can begin with myself. The mind takes these teachings in quickly. They make sense. We feel something shift. But then we get up from where we were sitting, and within a few minutes, the old tightness returns. The shoulders climb back to their old height. The jaw clenches again. The breath grows shallow. The mind may have understood, but the body is still living the old patterns. This is not a failure. This is simply how the body is. The body learns slowly. The body needs many small repetitions before it lets a pattern go. Just as the body did not learn its tightness all at once, it cannot release its tightness all at once. There is something tender in this slowness. The body is being honest with us. It is showing us how long it has been carrying what it has been carrying. The shoulders that took 50 years to climb to their high position will not drop in an afternoon. The jaw that learned to brace itself in early childhood will not soften because we have read a wise book. The body keeps its own time, and that time, the Buddhist teachers said, is to be respected, not fought. What the Buddhist tradition teaches is that the body's slowness is not a problem. It is the very thing that allows the release to be deep. If the body could simply drop a pattern in a single moment, the release would be shallow. The slow returning, the small noticing, the gentle settling again and again is what allows the change to reach all the way through. The old man in the story did not force his shoulders down. He did not even try. He simply noticed, and the noticing was enough. Over time, the noticing did the work. The body, given a small chance to settle, began to remember what settling felt like. The remembering grew. The new pattern, slowly, began to live alongside the old one. After a year, the new pattern had become the deeper one. This is one of the soft gifts of the Buddhist path. There is nothing we have to force. We only have to give the body, here and there, the chance to settle. The settling itself does the rest. The Buddha said that the body is the first place where wisdom takes root. The mind can carry an idea for years and still not be changed by it. The body, given even a small chance to rest, begins to know what the idea actually meant. There is a smaller story about a woman who walked the same forest path every morning for many years. She had been walking this path since she was a girl. She knew every bend, every clearing, every old tree she passed. One morning, after a great storm had moved through the night, she walked the path and found it changed. Several old trees had fallen. Their roots had been pulled up from the earth. They lay across the path in heavy silence. She stopped beside one of them. It had been the largest oak in the forest. She had passed it every day of her life. She had assumed it would always be there. She looked around. The young trees, the slender ones she had often thought too small to weather any real difficulty, were all still standing. Their leaves still moved gently in the morning air. They had survived because they had bent. The big old oak had been too strong to bend, and so, when the great wind came, it had broken. She stood there for a long time. She had been a stiff woman all her life. She had prided herself on her strength. She did not bend easily for anything. She held her opinions tightly. She held her grudges tightly. She held her body tightly, with the same conviction the big oak had held its roots. She looked at the young trees again. She looked at the fallen oak. Something quiet shifted in her. She walked home slowly that morning. She did not become a different person all at once. But over the months that followed, she began to notice when she was bracing. Where the young oaks bent, she began to allow her own body to do the same. A small softening of the jaw when she felt tense. A small loosening of the shoulders when she felt afraid. A small bend in a place she had always before tried to stand rigid. She did not lose any strength. She lost only the part of strength that had been brittleness. By the time she was very old, her body was softer than it had been in her youth, and she had outlasted the storms that broke many people who had tried to be hard. This is one of the quietest and most important teachings of the Buddhist tradition. We do not have to force the body into a different shape. We do not have to overcome the patterns we have been carrying. We only have to stop fighting them and give them the chance to soften. The old man at the pond did not push his shoulders down. The woman in the forest did not force herself to be flexible. Both simply noticed something true and gave the body a small space in which to begin changing. Over time, the changing happened on its own. This is what the Zen teachers called the gentle path. There is no battle to fight. There is no enemy in the body. The tension we carry is not a sign of our weakness. It is a record of where we have been. And like any record, it can be quietly released when we are ready to see it. The Buddha said that the wise person befriends the body. They do not push it. They do not punish it. They simply listen to it, day after day, and let it know that it is safe to soften. This is the soft work of a lifetime. We will not be free of all our patterns. The body will keep some of its old shapes for as long as we are alive. But more and more of them, with the slow help of our attention, will begin to ease. The shoulders will lower a little. The breath will deepen a little. The small clench in the jaw will release, then return, then release again. Each release, however small, is a kind of letting go. And each is welcomed by a body that has been quietly waiting for permission, sometimes for years, to remember its own ease. There is something tender in knowing this. The body has not been working against us all this time. The body has been faithfully holding what we asked it to hold, often without our knowing we were asking. And it is ready, whenever we are, to begin slowly setting it down. We do not have to apologize to the body. We do not have to repair anything. We only have to begin, here and there, to let it know it is safe. Let us rest for a moment. There is nothing to do. The body is here. The breath is here. Whatever has been ready to settle can settle in its own time. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from a life of constant reaching. It is not the tiredness of physical labor. It is something else. It is the slow weariness of always wanting one more thing, of always feeling that we have not quite arrived, of always living for the next acquisition or accomplishment that will finally let us rest. Most of us carry some of this tiredness without naming it. It sits underneath the days. We notice it most clearly in quiet moments, when we finally stop moving and feel the strange ache that has been there all along. The Buddhist tradition has a particular word for the alternative. It is called sangwara. The word is sometimes translated as restraint, but this can sound stern or self-denying. The word actually means something gentler. It means a gathering inward, a coming home, a quiet settling back into a center we had been moving away from. The Buddha taught that this gathering is not a denial of life. It is a return to the simplest pleasure available to us. The pleasure of not needing the next thing, of resting in what is already here, of letting the hand finally rest. There is a story about a merchant who lived in an ancient trading city where the great caravans came from many countries. He had been a successful man for 30 years. As a young man, he had inherited a small shop from his father and had begun to expand it. By his middle years, he owned 3 shops, then 6, then 12. He owned land outside the city. He owned a fine house with a courtyard and a garden. He owned several horses. He had earned the respect of other merchants and was greeted in the street by people who had once not known his name. He had also worked, in those 30 years, almost without stopping. He rose before dawn. He went over his accounts at night by lamplight. He traveled to the surrounding villages and the distant ports. He met with caravan leaders and tax collectors and rival merchants. Each new acquisition gave him a small flash of satisfaction and then dissolved almost at once into the next thing that needed to be done. He did not call himself tired. Tiredness was for people who had not yet succeeded. He called himself busy, and he wore the busyness like a fine cloak. It was proof, he thought, of who he had become. One evening, returning from a long day's journey to one of his outlying lands, he stopped his horse by a small stream to drink. The horse drank. The merchant dismounted and knelt at the water's edge. He cupped his hands and drank as well. The water was cold and clean and tasted of the stones it had been moving over. He stood up. He looked around. The light was soft. The air smelled of evening. The horse breathed quietly beside him. He noticed something unfamiliar. He was not reaching for anything. For the first time he could remember, in many years, there was nothing in his mind he was about to do. He had just drunk water. The water had been enough. He was not already thinking about the next stop. He was not already planning the next conversation. He was simply standing by a small stream in the soft evening, with a horse and a quiet body. It was such a strange feeling that for a moment he did not know what to do with it. He sat down on the grass at the edge of the stream. The horse, sensing the pause, lowered its head and began to graze quietly. The merchant watched the water move past him. He watched a small, bright fish dart through a shallow place near the bank. He watched the light begin to deepen as the sun moved lower. A quietness filled him that he had not felt in 30 years. He could not remember the last time he had felt it. Perhaps he had felt it as a boy, sometimes, before he had taken over the shop. Even then, it had probably only visited briefly. He did not move. He did not reach for the reins. He did not begin to think about what came next. He simply sat. After a long time, he realized something that made his eyes sting. This had been available the entire time. For all 30 years, he could have sat down by a stream like this one. He could have drunk water and not reached for anything else. He could have let an evening simply be an evening, instead of a small space between two pieces of work. The quiet that was filling him now had been waiting for him every single day for 30 years. He had been too busy gathering to notice. He did not feel angry about this. He felt nothing as sharp as anger. He felt something close to wonder. He felt as though he had spent his whole life walking past his own front door, and only now had paused to see that it had been open all along. The horse finished grazing. The evening grew cooler. The merchant rose, slowly. He mounted the horse. He continued the journey home. But something had changed. From that evening on, he began to notice when he was reaching and when he was not. He did not give up his shops. He did not sell his land. He did not become a hermit. He simply began, here and there, to stop, to drink the water, to let an evening be an evening, to return to the quiet that he now knew had always been available to him. He grew old in his fine house. The shops continued. The land continued. The horses came and went. But more and more of his life was lived in the small pauses he gave himself. The quiet by the stream became the quiet he carried with him. When he was very old, a young man came to him asking for advice on how to become as successful as he had been. The merchant looked at the young man for a long moment. He smiled. "I will not give you advice on success," he said. "I will give you advice you did not ask for. Find a stream somewhere on your way. Drink from it. And then, just once, do not stand up immediately. Sit. See what fills you." The young man did not understand. He thanked the merchant politely and went on his way. The merchant smiled to himself as the young man left. He remembered being that young. He remembered how long it had taken him to understand. This is what the Buddhist tradition meant by sankara. The word sounds austere when we translate it as restraint, but in its original meaning it carried something else. It carried the quality of homecoming, of gathering back, of returning to a center we had not realized we had wandered from. The Buddha taught that the constant reaching outward is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of forgetting. When we forget that we are already whole, we have to gather things to ourselves to prove that we are. We acquire silks, land, horses, achievements. We acquire compliments, respect, attention. Each new acquisition gives us a small flash of feeling and then dissolves almost at once. We reach for the next. This is one of the strangest and most ordinary forms of suffering. It does not hurt sharply. It hurts as a steady background ache, a subtle tiredness that does not lift even after a long sleep, a feeling that something is incomplete even when nothing visible is wrong. What the Buddha pointed at is that this whole pattern of reaching is itself the obstacle to the rest we are seeking. The reaching keeps us moving past the very thing we are reaching for. The merchant had been moving past quiet for 30 years. The quiet had been there. He had not been. This is why the Buddhist tradition speaks of restraint as a pleasant thing. It is not the pleasure of getting what we wanted. It is the much deeper pleasure of no longer needing anything more. The pleasure of putting the cup down. The pleasure of letting the day be the day. When this pleasure is tasted, even once, it begins to change us. We start to suspect that all our reaching was not for the things themselves, but for the feeling we hoped the things would give us. And we begin to notice that the feeling is closer than the things were. It is not in the next acquisition. It is in the small pause between acquisitions. It is in the moment when we drink the water and do not stand up. The Zen teachers said that the deepest pleasure available to a human being is the pleasure of having nothing to do. Not boredom, not idleness. The full, satisfied pleasure of being where we are, with no part of us trying to be somewhere else. There is a smaller story that comes from a school of archery in the old hill country. A young archer came to study with a master who was famous for his stillness. The young archer wanted to learn to shoot quickly. He drew his bow at every bird that crossed the sky, at every leaf that moved unexpectedly, at every shadow on the practice ground that looked like it might be something worth shooting at. He was full of energy. He thought this energy made him a good student. The master watched him for a long time. Then one morning, the master came to him with a single instruction. For the next month, he said, you will not draw the bow at anything you have not waited for. The young archer was confused. How long must I wait? He asked. You will know, the master said. The first day was difficult. The young archer's hand kept rising to the bow. His muscles wanted to draw. He had to keep stopping himself. By the end of the first week, the wanting to draw had quieted. He stood on the practice ground, He breathed. He watched. He did not raise his hand at every passing thing. By the end of the second week, something curious had begun. When he did at last draw the bow, the drawing felt different. It was no longer a thrashing of energy. It was simple. It was almost without effort. The arrow seemed to leave the bow because it was time for it to leave, not because he had forced it. By the end of the month, he had stopped wanting to draw the bow at all. The bow simply rested in his hand. When a moment came that called for an arrow, the moment itself seemed to draw the bow. He did very little. He went to his master. "I do not understand what has happened," he said. "I have shot fewer arrows in this month than I used to shoot in a single morning. But every one I have shot has been better than any arrow I have shot before." The master smiled. "You have learned the first lesson," he said. "The reaching was getting in your way. The reaching had become the obstacle to your own skill. When you let it rest, what was actually in you was free to come forward." This is the quiet center of what the Buddhist tradition has to teach about coming home. The reaching, the gathering, the constant moving toward the next thing is the very thing that has been keeping us from rest. We do not need to add anything to our lives in order to find the rest we are seeking. We only need to let the hand, here and there, become still. The merchant did not give up his shops. The young archer did not give up his bow. Neither of them turned away from life. They simply stopped pushing through life. They learned, slowly, to let the moment do what the moment wanted to do, without their constant interference. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of the middle way. It is not a way of grasping at the world, and it is not a way of pushing the world away. It is a way of being present where we already are, with what is already happening, in the simple stillness that has always been available. When we begin to learn this, our days take on a different quality. We still do our work. We still meet our responsibilities. We still love and care and try, and sometimes fail. But underneath all of it, there is a small pause that did not used to be there. A small homecoming in the middle of a busy hour. A small moment of drinking the water and not standing up immediately. These pauses are the seeds of a quieter life. Not a different life. A quieter version of the life we are already living. The same days. The same people. The same work. But meeting them now from a center that has finally remembered itself. The Buddhist teachers said that the person who has learned this art walks through the world with a particular quality. There is nothing flashy about it. They are not unusually serene. They are not always smiling. They simply move through their days without the small constant grasping that drives most lives. They drink the water and do not always have to stand up. They finish a task and do not always have to begin the next one immediately. They sit down sometimes for no reason. They breathe out and rest and do not feel they are wasting their time. This is the quiet harvest of coming home. It does not arrive in a single moment. It builds slowly, one small pause at a time, until the pauses are no longer something we have to remember. They become part of how we live. The mornings grow gentler. The evenings grow longer. The whole of an ordinary life begins to feel, here and there, like the home we had always been moving toward. Let us rest for a moment. There is nothing to gather. There is nothing to add. What we have been moving toward has been moving alongside us. When you are ready, we will continue together. The breath has been moving the entire time we have been listening, without anyone telling it to. It has been rising and falling in the chest. The body has been gently lifted and gently let down. None of it has required our attention. None of it has required our effort. It has simply been happening, as it has been happening since we were born. This is one of the small miracles of being alive that we almost never notice. The breath does itself. It does not need us to do it, or to be a particular kind of person, or to be in a particular kind of mood. It is simply there, faithfully, breath after breath, from the morning of our birth until the very end. The Buddha noticed this very deeply. Of all the things in human experience, he found the breath to be the most quiet and the most reliable. It was always available. It asked for nothing. And he saw, in his many years of teaching, that the breath could become a kind of bridge. A bridge between what? Between an idea and a felt reality. Between the mind and the body. Between knowing something to be true and actually living from that truth. In the old Buddhist language, the breath was called kaya sankara. The phrase means something like the body's quiet shaper. The breath was understood to be the place where mental states settled into the body. A thought of kindness, breathed into, became kindness in the chest. A wish for peace, breathed into, became peace in the shoulders. The breath was the small, faithful messenger that carried what the mind understood into what the body lived. There is a story about a man who could not swim and who one day decided to learn. He went to a small lake near the village where he lived. The lake was wide and shallow at its edges and grew deeper toward the center. The water was very still in the early evening. The light was beginning to turn gold. He stood at the shore in his simple clothes and looked at the water. He had been afraid of water all his life. He did not know why. He simply was. But something had been growing in him for some months. A small, patient wish to know what the water was like. Not to master it. Not to become a great swimmer. Just to know what it was to be in it. He stepped to the edge. The water touched the tips of his sandals. He let it touch them. He did not move away. After a long moment, he took off his sandals and set them on a flat rock. He stepped into the lake with his bare feet. The water was cool. It came up only to his ankles. It was completely harmless. He stood there for a long time, letting his feet feel the cool, the gentle pull of the lake's slow movement, the small, smooth stones underfoot. After many minutes, he took another step. The water reached his shins. He paused. He breathed. He realized something he had not known. The fear was not in the water. The fear was in him. The lake had no opinion about him. The lake was simply being a lake. He took another step. The water reached his knees. The cool of it climbed up his legs. He paused again. He breathed again. He felt the slow rhythm of his own breath, in the chest, in the belly, in the small movement of his shoulders. He noticed that each breath out left him a little softer. Each breath in arrived without him needing to ask for it. The breath was doing what the breath always did. The body was being held, faithfully, by something that had been with him every moment of his life, and that he had almost never paid attention to. He did not hurry. He stayed in the place he was for as long as he needed to. He let the water and his body become familiar with each other. He let the fear, which visited him at every step, settle on its own, as fear settles when nothing is actually wrong. Step by step, breath by breath, he walked deeper. The water reached his thighs, then his waist, then his chest. He had never been this deep in water before. The fear visited him again. He stood still. He breathed. He waited for the fear to settle. It always did, eventually. Sometimes it took only a moment. Sometimes it took several minutes. He did not rush it. He stood at last in water up to his chest. He could feel the slow current of the lake around him. He could feel the cool against his skin. He could feel his own breath moving in and out, more deeply than it had moved in many years. He realized, standing there, that he was no longer afraid. He had not defeated the fear. He had not pushed it away. He had simply, step by step, let his body learn that the water was safe. The body had been the one who needed to learn. The mind had known for years. But the mind cannot teach the body by thinking. The body learns by doing. The body learns by breathing. He stayed in the water until the light began to fade. Then he walked back to the shore, slowly, the same way he had come in. He put on his sandals. He walked home. Each evening, for many evenings, he returned to the lake. He waded a little further. He stayed a little longer. The body, given the chance, kept learning. By the end of the summer, he was swimming. Not gracefully, not far, but he was floating. He had let the water hold him. He had trusted, finally, what had always been waiting to hold him. He thought, when he was old, that everything important in his life had been learned this way. By small steps, by patience with the fear, by giving the body the chance to settle, breath by breath, into what the mind had long since known. This is one of the great soft teachings of the Buddhist tradition. The wisdom we read and hear about does not become our own until the body has lived it. The mind can understand non-clinging in an instant. But the body, with its long history of holding tightly, takes time to learn that the holding can ease. The mind can understand the open hand in a single moment. But the fingers, accustomed to closing, take many small lessons to remember that they can open. The breath is the place where this learning happens. When a wise intention arises in the mind, the Buddha taught, we can carry it into the body through the breath. A kind thought, breathed into, begins to soften the chest. A wish for ease, breathed into, begins to lower the shoulders. A simple intention to let go, breathed into, begins to loosen the fingers we have been clenching for years. This is not a magical practice. It is just patient attention. The breath rises. The breath falls. With each rise and fall, what the mind has understood is slowly given to the body to live. Over time, what we have been carrying as ideas becomes how we actually walk through our days. The Buddha said that the breath was perhaps the kindest teacher a person could have. It does not require us to be calm before we can begin. It does not require us to be wise. It does not require us to deserve it. It simply waits for us to notice it, and the moment we do, it begins to slow, to deepen, to settle the body around it. It is one of those quiet gifts that has been with us the whole time, asking nothing in return. This is why the Buddha taught that the deep stillness called samadhi is not a thing we struggle for. It arrives when we are at ease. It arrives when the heart is gentle and the body is breathing and the mind is no longer fighting. The struggle to attain it was always the thing keeping it away. The wisdom of the path is to stop struggling and let the stillness come on its own. The man in the story did not force himself to swim. He let the water teach him. He let his body learn at its own slow pace. The breath was his companion at every step. Each breath was a small message from the mind to the body. It is safe. You can settle. You can let the water hold you. When this kind of trust grows in us, something quiet happens. The whole script of the spiritual life, which can sound so heavy and difficult, becomes light. There is no enemy to defeat. There is no great achievement to reach. There is only the slow, patient, breath-by-breath letting of the body into a way of being that the mind has long suspected was possible. There is one more small story that captures all of this. A wanderer had spent many years searching for a temple he had heard about as a child. He had been told that inside this temple was a great peace. He had also been told that the doors of the temple were heavy, made of dark wood, and very difficult to open. For many years, the wanderer had walked the world. He had prepared himself to be strong enough to open the temple's doors. He had practiced his shoulders against many smaller doors. He had imagined the moment when he would arrive at the temple and lean his whole body against the great wooden door and slowly push it open, drenched in sweat, finally entering the peace he had been seeking. One evening, in his old age, he came at last to the temple. It stood at the top of a long slope of stone steps. It was beautiful in the soft evening light. The walls were old. The roof curved gently against the sky. He climbed the steps slowly. His legs were tired. His breath was short. He came to the great wooden door. He set his hands on it, ready to push with all his remaining strength. The door was already open. Not all the way, just slightly. A warm light was spilling through the small gap. He stood there for a long moment, his hands still on the door. The door was not locked. The door was not difficult. The door had been ajar, perhaps, the entire time. He had spent all those years gathering strength for a door that had never required strength. He pressed gently, almost without intending to. The door swung open easily, almost lovingly, as if it had been waiting. Warm light filled the doorway. He stepped inside. He stood there for a long time in the warm light. He thought about all the years he had spent imagining the heaviness of this door. He thought about how much of his life he had spent gathering strength he had never needed. He did not feel foolish. He felt something softer than that. He felt relieved. This is the small secret that lives at the center of the Buddhist path. The door we have been gathering ourselves to break open has been ajar all along. The peace we have been working toward is not behind a wall. The freedom we have been seeking is not at the end of a long struggle. The quiet we have been longing for is not in some other room, behind some heavy door we must force. It is here. It has been here. It has been quietly leaking light into our days through every small pause, every soft breath, every moment of genuine kindness, every flash of seeing clearly. We do not have to push hard. We only have to rest our hand against the door we thought was locked and feel it give. The Buddha said that of all the gifts of his teaching, this was the most surprising. People expected a long road of difficulty. He offered them a gentle hand resting on a door that opened on its own. People expected great practices. He offered them a slow breathing into what was already true. People expected a distant goal. He pointed at where they were standing. The whole journey we have made tonight has been a small returning to this. The grip can ease. The reaching can rest. The body can settle. The borrowed self can be set down. The two streams of feeling can both be tasted. The friend within can be welcomed. The door can be touched gently and found to be open. There is nothing more to do. There has never been very much to do. The freedom has been close enough to feel on the breath all along. When we look back on this evening, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in many years, what may stay with us is not the particular teachings or the particular stories. What may stay is something simpler. A small loosening of the fingers, a softening behind the eyes, a faint sense, somewhere underneath the ordinary days, that the great, difficult thing we had been bracing ourselves for was never going to be required of us. The door was open. The breath was here. The freedom we had been seeking had been moving in our chest, kindly, without our knowing. This is the gift the Buddhist tradition has been quietly carrying for 2,500 years. Not a heavy discipline, not a distant goal, just the simple, surprising news that what we have been searching for has been right here, all along, breathing us in and out, waiting only for us to notice. Of all the teachings the Buddha left behind, this may be the one that mattered most to him. He saw how easily a serious path could become its own kind of suffering. He saw how easily the search for freedom could become the very thing keeping us from it. And he kept pointing, again and again, at the simplest thing. The door is open. The breath is moving. There has never been very far to go. Let us rest here for a moment. The door is open. The breath moves on its own. Nothing more is needed. When you are ready, we will gather a final moment together before we close. This is where we will rest tonight. For some hours we have sat with a teaching that has been carried forward in many forms and through many voices for more than 2,500 years. It is a teaching that does not ask much of us. It does not require a heavy practice or a complete remaking of who we are. It only invites us, here and there, to notice, to soften, to recognize slowly that what we have been searching for has been moving in us the entire time. There is something quietly humbling about this. We are taught, almost from the beginning of our lives, that the good thing must be earned, that peace must be worked for, that freedom is the reward at the end of a long road of effort. The Buddha looked at this very gently. He did not call it wrong. He simply pointed at something the earnest mind has trouble believing. The good thing is not at the end of the road. The good thing is in the noticing of the road itself. The Buddha was once asked what the heart of his teaching was. He did not give a long answer. He held up a single flower, and he smiled. Those who saw it understood. The teaching, in the end, was as simple as a flower. It did not need to be explained. It only needed to be seen. Whatever has settled in us during these hours, however small, will continue to settle in its own time. The body will keep what it needs. The mind will gently carry what it can. The rest will fade, as most things do, into the long quiet of an ordinary life. If anything stays, it may not be a particular teaching or a particular story. It may simply be a quiet sense that something which had felt heavy for a long time has begun, here and there, to lighten. A small loosening, a small letting be, a small willingness to allow the next breath to arrive without our help. May whatever rises in us in the days ahead be met with a softer hand than we used to use. May the grip ease when it can. May the reaching rest when it can. May the quiet that has been waiting for us continue to be welcomed home. The hand can ease. The fingers can soften. There has never been anywhere else to go. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.